hello and welcome back to the Resources Conservation and Recycling webinar program. My name is Mitchell Jones. I'm the Outreach Editor at Resources Conservation and Recycling. It's my pleasure to have you all here with us, and also Yvonne, who is with us. Thank you for being here, Yvonne. So just to touch on this particular program, introduce the program. This is the English language webinar program of Resources Conservation and Recycling. We also have a Chinese language webinar program. So if you speak Chinese and you would be interested in that program, feel very free to check it out. This program that we're running now here, this runs every second Thursday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. The scope is including the entire breadth of the journal scope. So we are selecting 2 articles from each issue for invitations to provide a webinar. And as such, the webinars that are presented could come from any topic that the journal covers. We don't discriminate on topics. Our survey results, which people have been so good at providing, have indicated that there is an even distribution of interest in the entire scope of the journal. So at the moment, we have no intention of changing the scope of the webinar program, since people seem to be happy with its current scope. We do emphasize accessibility. This program is all about building appreciation for other people's research, interdisciplinary research, getting people interested in topics that may be adjacent to their fields, as well as, of course, hearing about the latest advances in their own field. So we do aim for these webinars to be really approachable, really easily understandable for a broader audience. And because of that, we always ask our presenters, where possible, to explain complicated terminology, to provide any fundamental basics that are necessary prior to talking about the more intricate details of their research area. Registration is required for this program. You can register in any number of different ways. The links are available to you on social media, on the journal's social media profiles. You can find them on X, you can find them on LinkedIn, you can also find them on Facebook, and they are also available in the newsletter that is circulated at the end of every month. In addition to that, you can find them on the journal homepage, the Elsevier journal homepage. If you go to the About tab and then go to Webinar Calendar, you will find the registration links for all the upcoming webinars, in addition to the links for all of our archived content, which is all archived to the journal's YouTube page. So you can feel very free to check it out there if you would like to. Speaking of YouTube, these webinars are not only performed in Zoom, as we are using right here, allowing people the opportunity to ask questions and interact with the speaker. They are also live streamed to Zoom, to YouTube. So if you would prefer not to join us in the Zoom room, you can see the live stream on YouTube. And you can get access to all of our archived content on the journal's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@RCR journal. Apart from that, as I said, we get a lot of interesting information from you guys from the surveys. We really appreciate the information that you give. We do take it seriously. We do act on it. If you would like to tell us something about the program, about how you're finding it, please feel free to do so. You will get the opportunity when you close Zoom, you will be given a survey, the opportunity to fill in a survey. It's very short. It only takes a couple of minutes, might be 5 or 6 questions. And we seriously consider what you say in that survey. So then I will switch across to our schedule for today. And of course, introduce our speaker. Our event program for today, we have had our welcome address. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the journal. Then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Yvonne, and then talk a little bit about the administration side, very briefly, of the webinar for today, as it is every week. But if you're new, you will have the opportunity to hear about that. Then we're going to have a 20-minute presentation, 10 minutes of question time, and then a little bit of information about the next event. coupled with some closing remarks. So the journal, I trust that you all know the journal, but in case you don't, this is Resources Conservation and Recycling. The publisher is Elsevier. It's really quite broad. It's really all aspects of resources conservation and recycling, but with focal points on systems-wide strategies, technological, economic, institutional, and policy focus, resource management practices, conservation, recycling, and resource substitution, resource productivity improvement, restructuring of production and consumption profiles, and transformation of industry. So if you have any excellent research in those areas, be sure to submit it to the journal. So a couple of points for the administrative perspective. This is an English language program, and as such, we want everybody to understand each other in English. So please use English if you need to ask a question or such, or if you wish to ask a question. We have closed captions available. They're currently running, and they appear to be doing quite a good job currently. So if you would like to watch the webinar without audio, or perhaps if English is not your first language and you would benefit from some sort of caption, they are available there for you. Be sure to check them out. If you have any questions over the course of the webinar, please post them in the Q&A during the presentation. And if you see a comment or a question there that you relate to, that you would have asked yourself potentially, be sure to upvote it so that we know that that one was of particular interest. We can maybe spend a little bit more time discussing that point, or we can at least increase its priority in the order of which we address the questions or queries. If you would prefer to speak directly to Yvonne, and you would prefer to ask your question directly, that's also possible. You just have to use the raised hand reaction, and we'll be more than happy to have you either as an audio or a video and audio feed directly speaking to Yvonne, if there is time. So, introducing our speaker then. The speaker is Yvonne RYAN-FOGARTY from the University of Limerick. She is going to be speaking with us on the topic of lost mercury, environmental impact of discarded electronics in scrap and municipal wastes. So Dr. RYAN-FOGARTY's research interests are industrial ecology and material flow analysis, with a focus on the emerging circular economy. She is particularly interested in high-impact waste streams, hazardous components, and critical raw materials. She was previously the project manager of STRIKE, an EU-funded project on transboundary movements of hazardous waste streams. She was nominated by the Irish government to be part of the open-ended scientific group on effectiveness evaluation of the Minamata Convention on mercury, as she contributed to refining the mercury inventory toolkit in products to material flow, waste materials flows. Beg your pardon. As part of the EEE to WEEE project, she worked with policymakers and the scrap metal industry to develop a material flow analysis protocol that was inexpensive and non-disruptive to waste management business operations. This methodology is currently used and cited by the Irish Environmental Protection Agency to report waste statistics to the EU. Thank you so much for being with us today, Yvonne. I am really looking forward to your presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop screen sharing so that you are able to.
Okay, thanks, Mitchell. Just going to try and share this screen now and try and start my slideshow from the beginning. Okay, can we see that? Mitchell, you might let me know if this looks okay. Not yet?
No, it's not yet, but you could.
Okay. Oh. Need to escape and, oh yeah, screen 2. Yeah, that should, oh yeah, share.
Excellent. There's your screen.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Now, perfect. Great. It's just that when one screen takes over, the other one disappears. Okay. You'd think we would have learned by now from all of the pandemic webinars and things like that, but it's just when you change platforms from Teams to Zoom to Webex so frequently.
Of course, yes. We've all had our experience with that, haven't we?
Absolutely. So without further ado, I will give my presentation. And thanks to RCR for the kind invitation to present my work. It's It's always lovely to get a chance to reflect on a piece of work that you've done and look at it again in a new light. So what I'm going to present this evening is based around this paper, Uncaptured Mercury Loss to the Environment from Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment, or WEEE, we call it WEEE in the EU, but I'm going to try and not use the term WEEE. I'm going to really try and use the term e-waste while I'm speaking this evening. If I say WEEE, I do mean e-waste. So looking at that in scrap metal and municipal waste. And this paper was published in Resources Conservation and Recycling just a few months ago. So the kind of topic of interest here as well is obviously mercury. The World Health Organization classify mercury as one of the top 10 chemicals of concern. It's a neurotoxin and there's no safe levels. Mercury comes from both natural and anthropogenic sources. Once it's released to the environment, it cycles, and it's impossible to remove. It bioaccumulates in food chains, and we cannot control the natural events such as volcanoes that release mercury naturally. So for us, really, the key is to eliminate what we can control, the anthropogenic or man-made sources of mercury through control and prevention methods. The Minamata Convention is an important step in making progress towards the elimination of human-driven mercury pollution. The Minamata Convention came into force in 2017, and its basic provisions are that there's to be no more new mercury mines, mercury phase out from products, and mercury elimination from extractive processes, for example, gold mining. So a couple of key provisions there. Because Ireland is a member of the EU, we signed the convention as a group. The Minamata Convention on Mercury was brought into law through the mercury regulation, but it includes measures that kind of go beyond the Minamata Convention so that all mercury waste is safely taken out of the economic sphere, stabilized in a less toxic form, and stored permanently in environmentally sound conditions. Mercury was also targeted under the restriction of hazardous waste directive and also the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, also called the WEEE Directive. And examples of measures include that the mercury content of light bulbs was capped, e-waste containing mercury must be appropriately treated, and I will kind of outline what that means in the Irish context and how I call that captured mercury. However, mercury is still in certain products such as certain electronic equipment, switches and relays, measurement and control equipment, and some batteries, and even some energy efficient and fluorescent lighting. However, the sale of fluorescent lighting containing mercury they were actually banned from sale here just this year, 2023. So this diagram represents the global mercury supply and demand. No one really knows what mercury accumulated in society is exactly and how long it will take to move these mercury added products into long-term storage and environmentally sound disposal. And that's kind of where my research comes in here. How do we ensure that this happens and that release to the environment up here does not? So it struck me that something needed to be done to make sure that we manage this mercury accumulated in society part. And how can we figure out ways to do that? One of the things I started to research was the mercury inventory of Ireland. So the United Nations Environmental Programme developed a mercury inventory toolkit, which can be used by new entrants into the Minamata Convention. I decided to complete the toolkit for Ireland, even though Ireland was already compiling pollution and climate inventories. So our Environmental Protection Agency had been advised to undertake studies on historic landfills and products such as batteries containing mercury to improve the inventory that provides data to the UN Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. This yielded interesting results as it highlighted the link between consumption and production, leading to mercury emissions. So this is just a draft of what I've been working on, the mercury inventory for Ireland. So please do not cite this. This is just a very, very rough draft. But it's the products here that I'm concerned about, and how they get from, you know, product flows into emissions to land, water, hazardous waste, and to air. So it's trying to really flesh out and tease out those movements. So by products, part of that product section is electronic and electrical products. Now, when they are no longer in use, they obviously become e-waste. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world. The Global E-Waste Monitor for 2020 estimates that 53.6 million tonnes of e-waste were produced in 2019. Actually, the Global E-Waste Monitor, the updated one, is due to come out this December, and from initial conversations, I believe that that figure is going to increase substantially, which is very, very concerning. This figure is predicted to rise to 74 million tonnes by 2030, and we're on trajectory to be there. Absolutely, unfortunately, it's an unacceptable situation. E-waste is a problem for several reasons. It takes a lot of resources to make electrical and electronic equipment, especially information and communications technology and battery-containing items. These require specific materials to drive their functionality. And more often than not, these are critical raw materials or rare earth elements. These must be mined, and that creates devastating environmental impact. And again, this releases more mercury. E-waste can be difficult to treat at the end of life, especially if collection rates are low. And the material, often the valuable or rare material content is small per item, and processes to remove materials of interest can be absolutely impossible or economically just not viable. So what I'm going to explain about is a little bit about is captured mercury. So here in Ireland, we have an e-waste and a capture system. For example, if I buy a new dishwasher, the old one is collected by the retailer when they deliver my new one. I can bring items to collection points for recycling, but e-waste should not go into general waste collections. They must be collected separately. E-waste is sent to a dedicated facility that breaks down the dedicated facility or facilities that break down the items. So these are just some items that contain mercury that were actually captured and removed for safe treatment and removal. And I'd like to credit KMK Recycling for sending me these pictures of actual mercury items that they set aside and have sent for appropriate treatment and captured. That mercury is not getting back out into the environment. It will be treated appropriately. So mercury-added products, their safe handling and treatment is obviously very important. So we are e-waste containing mercury, including batteries, lamps, desktop and laptop computers, so the semiconductors in them, backlighting lamps in old CRT TVs, and in LED, in some of the plasma screen TVs, relays and switches. And this can lead, treating these appropriately can lead to job creation. So most mercury containing e-waste is now historic, but there's still smaller concentrations found in some products. So for example, for here in this photo, you can see this is an old cathode ray tubed TV, and there's a worker here removing some of the hazardous components, and they're wearing, you know, personal protective equipment and doing that in a safe fashion. So not only is this better for the environment, it can create employment too. So while hazardous materials are captured, other raw materials and valuable materials could also be extracted. So lamp recycling in Ireland, I'm going to credit as Irish Lamp Recycling for these photos. And this is from a recent poster presentation that we gave at the Industrial Ecology Conference this year in Leiden. So this is just the process. This is actually an example of public lights. They're taken apart, manually disassembled. Their lamps are crushed under wet conditions, and this hazardous flood contains mercury but is then removed for safe capture and disposal. And there's a separation process of glasses from the metals and end caps of those lamps. So these lamps then are sent, the mercury containing sludge is sent abroad for treatment. What I'm going to speak about is uncaptured mercury, the mercury contained in products that don't get captured by recycling plants and by appropriate waste treatment facilities. So e-waste recovery and job creation can't happen if e-waste ends up in other waste collections. And even with a good collection system, e-waste still ends up outside of this. So this research used a survey of e-waste in metal scrap and data from the Environmental Protection Agency waste characterization reports. And this is performed every few years on curbside waste collections. And the results from the EPA surveys are quite detailed and specific. Just to give a method overview, what I'll present today are findings resulting from work on this E2WEEE project, and this was funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. The overall purpose of that research was to understand e-waste flows in Ireland in order to boost e-waste collection rates and target interventions as to where the authority needs to step in, or where recycling rates could be boosted and capture rates could be boosted. So across the world, it's well documented that e-waste ends up in scrap metal collections, and a key aspect of this work was to quantify that and quantify the amount that's just not removed for appropriate treatment. This generated a database from which my current work on mercury containing e-waste was informed, and then this was coupled with, I skipped on ahead a little bit. This was then coupled with work that the United Nations University and S-Cycle progressed on waste mercury flows and e-waste, and then using additional data from the EPA's waste characterization studies. So this is kind of just an overview of how the data were collected. So the national statistics, there was interviews with the method we used was developed to meet the particular challenges in the Irish context. And we fully outlined this method. It was published in a 2021 paper that really just outlines the method from start to finish. So I'm kind of going to run through it quite quickly. We could not compel the scrap metal industry to participate, but they did voluntarily because they could actually see the long-term advantages of getting metal scrap that was not contaminated with e-waste into their facilities, because now they're working towards end of waste standards and end of waste certification. So they really want to be exporting the cleanest metal scrap metal and iron that they possibly can. The sites are small, so there's not much room for setting aside e-waste and weighing it at a later time, and we couldn't pay them for downtime incurred. So it was identified that one list of waste code in particular dominated. So iron and steel arising from construction and demolition waste is what was surveyed. So bearing in mind, this is actually only a survey of one type of scrap metal entering the scrap metal system. So this is a conservative estimate of mercury lost in metal scrap. So what we looked at was iron and steel arising from construction and demolition waste. And then from the national waste statistics, we were able to get the total annual quantities of this. So basically, each load coming onto sites was identified. E-waste within each load was categorized by UNU code. There's 54 or 56 UNU codes. Overall, 415 tons of waste were sampled, and from this, an estimated 3.91% plus or minus 1.88% of this was e-waste. For 2018, this equated to around 11,000 tons of e-waste that was hidden in metal scrap, really. And that equates to 2.28 kilograms per person in Ireland. So, and to put that into context, Ireland collected 10.88 kilograms per person. So if 2.28 is being lost to metal scrap, that's quite significant. So crucially, by using this method, we generated compositional data on e-waste arising as a result of construction, demolition, and renovation activities. So we were able to kind of do counts of e-waste and things like of e-waste occurring in this metal scrap. So e-waste collection targets are mass-based, so it is in countries' best interest to target high-mass items such as white goods. So, for example, washing machines are really heavy, refrigerators and fridge freezers are too. And that's useful as collecting these also targets recovery of CFCs and F-gases and things like that. And most countries have set up point of sale recycling where like-for-like exchanges can happen. Where what we're observing here are materials that arise because they are left in homes that are being renovated or demolished. So we can see here that central heating boilers, like there's a huge number of those. It was most dominant in sample. But the third most populous was luminaires, so lighting from shops and commercial premises. So as they're renovated, these lighting just comes in as part of the clear out of stuff that comes in. So recently, e-waste recovery targets were criticised for not reflecting the shift towards circular economy and recovery of raw materials. And through this research, I argue that we've also failed to meet some of the target hazardous materials at the end of life, particularly for mercury-containing products. So the next thing I did was to isolate mercury-added products from the database. And the database of e-waste in metal scrap contained an inventory of every category of e-waste found in the metal scrap on sites. The United Nations University coding system for e-waste identified which codes contained mercury. And what we looked for in the scrap metal data were the following: desktop PCs, laptops, mobile smartphones, flat display monitors, flat display TVs, compact CFLs, straight tube fluorescents, and special lamps. So challenges that arose in identifying the different classifications of lamps. So in picture A here, you can see that there is intact fluorescent lamps within this. In picture B, there's a housing but no lamps. So the lamps are either smashed or removed. In D, there's this is actually a street lamp, and the lamp, the bulb is gone, but I think the casing was left. And there's some stage lighting here in E, so it's kind of from a theatre or a shop or something. This kind of very specialized lighting. And here you have an exposed 2D tube that's come out of its fitting or its housing. So basically only intact singular bulbs were counted, although breakage between removal, loading, transportation and final tipping at the scrap metal site was highly probable. Some bulbs may have been removed for appropriate treatment, so we figured we're not counting them. So only, visually intact bulbs that we knew were present were counted. So on visual inspection alone, it was not possible to determine the difference between the various types of lamps. So for example, we counted over 108 additional lighting equipment items, many of which may have contained mercury, but were not included in this analysis. So where a housing mechanism was found, this was recorded as a luminaire rather than a count of individual bulbs separately, and therefore they were also excluded from the analysis. So CFL and long tube fluorescent lamps were not observed in significant quantities at scrap metal sites, obviously because many of them got broken en route. The EPA waste characterization report estimated that 233 tons of CFL, so compact fluorescent lights, went unrecovered and untreated from curbside waste collections from households and non-households during 2018. So we brought that data into the analysis. What couldn't be counted were specialist lamps, photocopiers. So there would be mercury-containing lamps and bulbs in some photocopiers, some old projection equipment. So for example, I recently had to use a classroom that didn't have an overhead projector, and I borrowed a projector from another department, and it was quite an old one that you set up in the desk, and there was a big warning sticker on it that it contained a mercury lamp. And so we couldn't count mercury contained in instrumentation, nor in switches, nor in professional IT equipment. So again, really paring down what we've counted here. So from counting and projecting e-waste in metal scrap and municipal waste, we estimated that there were an estimated almost 18 kilograms of mercury lost to the environment as a result in 2018 alone. This is extremely diffuse, and we don't know at what point this will occur. Will that mercury be released to the environment at scrapyard, in transit, or at a smelter overseas? Data were available on gas discharge lamps as e-waste recyclers were obliged to record collection rates, and it's possible to isolate gas discharge lamp data in terms of product put on the market, waste collected and treated from Eurostat data and producer register data. So since 2013, all gas discharge lamps collected were treated and depolluted in Ireland, which is a great result to have. Similar observations were made by the UN Environment Report that there's a kind of an initial decline in demand for gas discharge lamps. So you can kind of see here that there was like a decline starting here in 2009 and 2010 for put on market, but then there was like a surge in put on market here in Ireland for a few years. And this was because of government incentives to replace lighting with more energy efficient lighting. And at the time, the more energy efficient lighting was compact fluorescent lighting, and fluorescent lighting, all of which contained mercury. So we are now moving towards a phase where we're trying to phase out mercury lighting and bring in more LED technology. So, you know, you can actually, it's interesting the impact that governmental policies have on driving consumption of certain products. So there was two of these schemes, one in 2010, which drove consumption in 2011, and another, the Better Energy Workplaces, in 2012. And you can see that would have driven consumption in 2014 when those grants came through for the public sector. Really interesting to see how that plays out, because these will be coming towards their end of life pretty soon. You know, the lifespan of a bulb is 10 to 15 years. So we should see lots of these coming into the recycling facility soon enough. So despite sales in 2018 appearing lower than previous years, the unit quantity reported to the producer register represented around 750,000. Sorry, my capacity to read numbers is waning. It's quite late here in Ireland. So around 750,000 units put on market, supplied to households and business end users. So quite a lot of lamps out there for recovery into the future. So just to finish with some key recommendations for policymakers, because I find that to be the most important part of my work, that I really want my work and my research to speak to policymakers. So I cannot underemphasize the importance of e-waste collection and for treatment. We need to extract valuable materials. We need to view the urban mine as a huge opportunity, and we need to remove this e-waste to protect health and the environment. But also we need to create employment, good work, stable jobs, healthy environments to work in as well, as part of the circular economy. The implications of findings and further conclusions. So one of Ireland's e-waste producer responsibility schemes estimated that only 3.2 million of the estimated 10 million bulbs that should become waste were captured for treatment in 1 year alone. The issue is that these lamps have no potential for recovery if they go into the wrong channel. Our research estimates this to contribute about 18 kilograms of mercury to the environment from this source alone, and this makes a substantial contribution to our mercury inventory. It's most likely that these will break in transit. They'll either end up in incinerators or in landfills or in smelters overseas. 2, it's clear that we need to focus on the removal of hazardous materials when items are no longer needed. Maintaining a focus on small e-waste items is still key. An example is the current disposable vape situation, with small weights but incredibly large volumes, thereby having a huge environmental impact. 3, and this is a problem in the construction and demolition and renovation sector, the transfer of ownerships and responsibilities and support for contractors to engage and protect the health and safety of their workers when removing hazardous e-waste items is critically important, and we need to really be tackling that issue as well. 4, the recovery of lamps beyond phase out of mercury will still be important for a viable circular economy. So recovery of critical raw materials such as indium and other rare earth elements is really important. Ireland already has a thriving lamp recovery industry and employs a significant number of people in this, capturing mercury and other hazardous materials and reducing the risk to environment and people through overseas transit for treatment. And it's really worth investing in these systems and keeping them going for the future, particularly around LED replacement. The LEDs contain a number of critical raw materials, and if an effective system has been set up to capture mercury containing lamps, surely continuing that system into the future to capture critical raw materials makes a lot of sense. And with that, we've come to the end of my presentation, and thank you for your kind attention, and for once again to RCR for the invitation to be here with you this evening. Please feel free to stay in touch. My email address is yvonne.ryan@ul.ie, and I'm happy to converse with anyone through emails for later on if they wish, but very happy to field questions here this evening. Thanks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Mitchell.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you very much. What an interesting presentation. Thank you so much for that. Now, we actually already have a number of questions in the chat, but I'm going to just emphasize now that it's possible if anyone else wants to add questions, because actually normally most of the questions come in the time now effectively. So I normally ask a few questions myself first to give a little bit of time for people to ask questions. There are some that are already, but I thought just before we do cover those, so maybe my questions are more focused on trying to fill that accessibility aspect and story nature of it. So maybe we'll just cover mine fairly briefly so that we have additional time for the actual questions from the audience. So I thought maybe to just go back to the story, the start of the story, Yvonne, maybe you could quickly tell us a little bit about mercury, why they actually started to use it in the first place, what it's used for, why it's used.
That's a really good question, and it's interesting because while I was doing this research, I worked in the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering, but my background is actually environmental science. So the reasons for mercury use are not something I'm overly familiar with, I have to say. I think mercury has some very interesting properties. It's always been a material of fascination, going back over the centuries. Cinnabar use, the color vermilion from mercury. It has intrinsic chemical properties that make it useful for electronics. So even with because it's a metal that's liquid at room temperature, for example, its use in thermometers. I mean, that I haven't even counted that in this. Its use in mercury in switches is kind of because it can turn things on and off based on gravity and temperature and things like that. So yeah, it has an interesting history of use, and it's one of those substances that we've used for going back in medicinal, and obviously people didn't realize it was poisoning them, but yeah, it's got a very, very interesting history.
Yes. Yeah, no, I always, my temperature was always measured with a mercury thermometer as a child. I think probably for many of us it's the case. Yes.
Yeah, me too.
So Yvonne, what kind of struck me was, if you know about it, I'm not sure, but what are the methods for storing mercury? So when these recyclers are actually extracting the mercury, they're disassembling the material, they're extracting it, what are they doing with it after that?
Yeah, so in Ireland, because we're quite a small country and we're an island nation, lots of our hazardous waste, once we have it kind of stabilized, it will go to specialist treatment facilities on the continent. As far as I know, liquid mercury is put into canisters and is actually stored in salt mines, so it cannot be accessed anymore. Yeah, and it's interesting that is done. And I mean, when I say it's captured, I think that's why I use the word captured, because it is locked
Literally
in
captured.
and put away. Yeah. So I quite liked that term at the time. Yeah.
Appropriate, an
Yeah.
appropriate term.
Yeah, and actually, look, I mean, the legislation would refer to appropriate treatment. So that's actually also another interesting use of language.
Yes, indeed. I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little more about this Minamata Convention.
Yeah, the Minamata Convention is an international convention signed by, I think, over 170 countries now who've committed to making mercury history, especially after the devastating impacts of mercury pollution on the people of Minamata in Japan. I mean, so one of the like an atrocity of an environmental pollution, and the realization that as humanity we cannot let that happen again. Unfortunately, mercury does bioaccumulate in our large fish species in particular, and it's obviously why we're advised, cautioned about consumption of tuna and consumption of other oily fishes, not exceeding too much. Especially the warnings are especially given to pregnant and expectant people, to be mindful of their consumption, because it can affect the neurological development of a developing fetus. So it's vital that we protect human health by removing mercury from the environment.
So obviously a very relevant, impactful research area then, yes. I also wondered, so perhaps this electronics recycling, it seems to me this is quite a bit more complicated than many other recycling methods, where this would not be easily automated, would it? So this is because you have different electronic components that need to be disassembled in different ways. I suppose it takes quite a skilled operator to be able to recognize certain components, take things apart, know exactly how certain things are going to be. Do you have any comments on the recycling aspect of it and the sort of skills and this potentially being a high value job creation sphere that can't really be automated?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. There's a really great piece of research that actually came out of this university, and not my research, but it was another researcher, Lisa T. O'Donoghue, who worked on a large scale automated. It actually treats flat panel screens. And I think it requires 2 operators. The screens go into a fully robotic system that cuts the mercury-containing lamps out of the screens and captures the mercury on activated carbon and separates all the components and directs them towards appropriate recycling and treatment. And that's a fantastic piece of technology. But again, the creation of that technology, the installation of it and the maintenance of it is actually a high value economic job, economic opportunity. So it's great to actually see that work. I mean, obviously, prevention is key. And, you know, we've had the ROHS directives and eco design have been key to reducing the mercury content of these products. But we really have to consider the historical waste products that people store in their homes, and figuring out how can we mobilize that waste, how can we just get it treated properly and recovered.
Definitely, yes. So, okay, it's obvious that there is some degree of automation that is possible. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And then the final question before I actually get to the questions that are there. You said that it ends up in scrap metal collections. I think, did you say about 2% approximately? Was that a number that you quoted?
nearly 3%, I think. Yeah,
nearly 3. So what effect does this sort of mercury contamination actually have? Do they need to get rid of that fraction? It's not usable anymore, or it's dangerous. It's a hazard that's then being put out there, and what's the sort of threshold? How much mercury can you have in there before it starts to become a problem?
Yeah, that's actually that's unknown, to be honest, because I mean, I'm guessing it kind of depends on the particular loads, and when you know, scrap metal goes, it's sorted on site into its high value components, and I'm sure there's trace contamination along the way. I see somebody has mentioned that they're researching cadmium removal. So I mean, you've a host of other hazardous materials that are, I suppose, hidden in metal scrap as well. And I think what happens really with metal scrap, it's you know, it goes to smelters. There's only so many smelters in the world. I think 5 or something like that. There's very few smelters in the world. And when that material is being resmelted, I'd imagine that some of these emissions will be released. They may be captured at you know, with abatement technologies at the smelters, but that's kind of outside the scope of my research here.
Of course. Okay, so then actually coming to the questions. So these are the ones that matter, not mine.
Yours are great.
I'm glad that you just to sort of fill the narrative a little bit with some other things. We have a comment here. So this is my area of environmental engineering on heavy metals. My master's research was on cadmium removal from wastewater. So comment there. Then a question. Electronics have become the fashion of the world. How can we minimize e-waste around the world?
It's the $1 million question. And I think that we really need to engage in some serious you know, circular economy practices, but also, you know, a fundamental rethink of the way in which we design products. Do we really need certain products? And can we engage servitization, for example, of products? I often think about my car that spends 80% of its lifetime not moving anywhere. Car share, ride share, you know, we're really going to have to decouple ownership. I think is going to be a big thing into the future. Eco design is going to be a key feature of that as well. Renting models. Yeah, we need a real rethink of the way in which we take, make, and use resources. I mean, again, it's the scope of the journal, isn't it? Mitchell, the resources conservation and recycling, the conservation part is key. Yeah,
definitely. The next question, but I think you're right. And there, for example, in Vienna, there is excellent public transport. Very few people need to use a car. I think most of the people have used the public transport. Or also, of course, there are options for, I think, GoGet, or there are certain short-term car rental services that are. Anyway, the next question. The mercury content in electronic equipments has been reducing due to national and international policies. However, the extensive use of mercury in artisanal mining faces a huge challenge, and prohibitions might not reduce its
consumption.
consumption.
Yeah.
What actions worldwide are taking to reduce mercury use in mining?
Yeah, well, the Minamata Convention and works quite closely with the UN and the United Nations environmental programs in particular to roll out many initiatives on reducing artisanal gold mining using mercury across the world. It's extremely challenging. It's the other thing that we really need to think about is rebound effect. As we phase out mercury in lamps, are we increasing the demand for gold in lamps? And gold mining is a key source of mercury emissions. Now, the mercury containing products compared to the mercury emissions from artisanal gold mining are small compared to those emissions. But surely gold demand is what's driving those emissions, and we have to somehow decouple our demand for freshly mined gold. That's a key part of that. And I think the electronics industry, as a consumer of gold, could really lead that if they so wish. But our demand for gold for jewelry and for as a currency is quite troubling.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because like in so many areas, it is those rebound effects that, there are so many problems like that where there would appear to be a simple solution, but this will have an effect which will cause an even more negative problem. How do you collect the statistics of e-waste around the world in the remote villages in Africa where there are no accessibility by vehicles or even motorbikes?
That I don't know.
That's a challenge.
Wasn't my study.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the global e-waste statistics are calculated at a national level by Prodcom data, for example, and customs data, and by sampling what a representative sample of what's incoming and outgoing within a nation. That's the extent of my knowledge on the situation in Africa. So I hope you can appreciate that that's kind of where my expertise ends.
How can we treat patients with mercury, poisoning in their system, and how can we remediate mercury problems in our ecosystem, especially in the water bodies and soils system?
Okay,
this
well,
is
the one
maybe
about
a little
patients, I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm terrified of blood, so it was never going to be on the cards. But mercury treatment, especially in water bodies and soil systems, remediation of sites, I suppose, where there are sites that are heavily contaminated with heavy metals, there are other people working on bioremediation methods and soil treatment methods. Not 100% aware of them myself, but I know that there's people working on them. But I can imagine trying to remove mercury from water bodies, soil systems, and sediments is a task that's rather challenging.
What is standard of
mercury level?
What's the standard of mercury level in the human bodies?
Not a medical doctor.
Yes, maybe good questions, but we unfortunately some of them may not be possible to answer. The last question: how a life cycle assessment and material flow analysis combined can address the resource use and conservation, like any methodology recommended to address such issues?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in material flow analysis, because I think it just really does highlight that things cannot be created nor destroyed. Everything has to go somewhere. And one of the key, the follow-on from this work is that we are actually trying to quantify the mercury-added products footprint and stocks in the built environment here at the moment. And it's actually quite interesting. The other thing that we're looking at is that rebound effect of switch over from mercury containing lamps to LED equivalents. It's actually very, very complex. And I mean, you have to, I mean, one of the key reasons why fluorescent lamps were brought in was because at the time when energy supply was from coal burning a key mercury emission as well, it was calculated that the replacement with mercury containing lamps would actually offset the mercury release from coal plants, that greater energy efficiency would result. So yes, I do think that we really need to engage in these conversations as a scientific community. So there is plenty of work and scope and analysis still there, and we've really only scratched the surface with some of this work. Great.
And
Thanks,
what great work
Yasu.
it is, Yvonne.
Thanks, Mitchell.
So thank you
Yasu
so much
just
for those
commented
questions.
on the
Also,
appropriate level of accepted values of mercury in the human body. So thanks for that information.
I'm sorry, I missed that one. Yes.
Yeah.
So the comment was 0.05 milligrams per liter accepted values of mercury should be in the human
Great.
body. Thank you for that.
We all know now.
We all know now. So thank you so much for your presentation, Yvonne. I'm just going to quickly mention a couple of closing remarks before we finish up, because we are actually a little over time, but that's really okay because we've had such interesting things to talk about. So the next webinar on the program will be delivered by Monica Varga from the Hungarian University of Agriculture and Life Sciences. We're going all around Europe and America and Canada and all places too. We have a nice mix of people contributing from all different places. So our next one from Hungary, she will be talking to us on process structure pathway analysis for conservation supporting coordinated assembly and disassembly. Now, that won't be Thursday week. We have a break, but it will be in approximately 4 weeks. It will be on Thursday, November 2nd, 2023 at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. So be sure to join us for that. I want to again thank Yvonne so much for her presentation. Thank you so much. And also congratulations on your new job, which I'm sure will be very exciting. And thank the viewers for their attendance and their active contributions and great questions. So thank you to everybody. And until next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.